Well, good morning. Thanks so much for being with us today. So glad you're in the room. If you're here for the first time or a repeat offender, thanks for being here. Those of you joining us online, thanks for using technology to be our guest today. My name's Seth. I'm one of the pastors. And today, we're going to be talking about something everybody wants, but few people have. The thing we're going to talk about today is happiness. Happiness. And happiness, it just feels like it's out of reach. You know what I'm talking about? It's all around us, and yet it eludes us, and it's like we're told to go after it. In fact, we've got all kinds of offers in our paths for happiness. Buy this, you'll be happy. Find the love of your life, you'll be happy. Have a baby or don't have a baby, you'll be happy. Take the vacation that you're looking for, you'll be happy. Find pleasure, you'll be happy. Indulge whatever it is that you want to indulge yourself in, and you'll be happy. And I'm just curious, if anyone were to ask you this question, how can I be happy? How would you answer that? If your kids or your grandkids, those of you who are parents or grandparents, or if a friend or somebody you care about asks you, how can I be happy? How would you answer that question? Or how about this? What if somebody asked you, what is happiness? How would you answer that question? What is happiness? Most of us don't know the answers to these. It's almost like, what is truth, right? We feel like it's kind of relative, maybe a little bit elusive, maybe a little bit ethereal, meaning it's like up there in the ether. We can't really grasp onto it. We can't hold on to it. We're not exactly sure. Sometimes it's easier to fill in a blank, like happiness is, such as happiness is ice cream on a hot day. Anybody feel that one? Yeah, that's happy. I'm happy with that. Or how about this one? Sunshine and a beach. Who wants that today, right? Yeah, woohoo. Those Hoosiers in the room, we love that. Or companionship, right? Happiness is having someone. Or for some of you who are the introverts, it's like, just take the other person out. Just give me the cup of coffee. There's my happiness right there. Babies, right? And happiness is one of the most innocent, happy things for me, I think, is seeing babies smile and hearing babies laugh. There's something just about that. A new car, right? That's happy. Who wants a new car? Or maybe yours is a truck, where you wish there were a new truck. Or a new house. Give us a new house. We'll be happy with that. Happiness is graduation, if I can just make it to the end or find something new. Happiness is going out on the weekend and having a party, right? Living life high, living the dream. This is my favorite one. Happiness is lots of money. I don't know why this picture never gets old. I love Scrooge McDuck and DuckTales from the original one, not the new one. The original is better. Happiness is having all kinds of stuff. So again, I just asked the question, how can I be happy, and what is happiness? Our culture has so many answers for that. In fact, it's almost like, I don't know if you've noticed this before, we're all on a happiness quest. I mean, we're all trying to figure out, what is happiness? How do I find happiness? How do I be happy? And yet, as much as we're all looking for it, nobody seems to find it. The adjectives we could use to describe Americans: depressed, stressed out, anxious, angry, violent, medicated, wealthy, just not happy. And our efforts to be happy, they just don't seem to work. In fact, in the words of what we talked about last week, happiness seems to be a vapor. Like we grasp for it, but we can't seem to hold on to it. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, let me catch you up in case you weren't with us last week, because we began this series last week called Adventure of a Lifetime. Adventure of a Lifetime. And this series is based on my favorite Christian band of all time, Caedmon's Call. I discovered one of their lead singers has actually become agnostic, meaning he's not really sure what he believes about God, and he's fairly certain that the Christian version, the Orthodox version of God is, no good anymore. And so he's tossing that by the wayside. And I listened to him interviewed on a podcast. I listened to him interviewing people sharing their deconversion stories. If you don't know what a deconversion story is, it's just a story of somebody who's walking away from the God that they believed in to whatever. Now, let me just say this. There can be some healthy deconversion, especially if we're walking away from a childish version of God to an adult version of God. And I would argue Yahweh, the God of the Bible, that we learn about there. So there can be some healthiness to that. But when we just abandon everything, it's a little bit sad. In fact, I've been a little bit not depressed, but just discouraged, like as I've listened to him share his story. And I think that we forget, because so often we want to build our faith on an emotion and how we're feeling in the moment. And if we're not feeling it, then, we just abandon it. We forget that what we Christians believe about God isn't based on blind faith. It's not based on blind emotion and how I'm feeling in the moment. What we believe about God is actually, there's some landscape to it, there's dirt, there's sweat, there's tears, there's history behind it, there's an event, an earth-shaking, earth-shattering event. We celebrated a couple weeks ago, the resurrection of Jesus, and nobody can deny the fact that the world changed in a remarkable, unbelievable way 2,000 years ago. No historian would deny the impact of Christianity on the history of the world. And so what we believe is not just out there, there's something that we can hold on to. What we talked about last week is around us, the invitation is to follow all kinds of things and to hold on to all kinds of things. But what we discover over time is that those things are just a vapor. And yet it's into the face of that Jesus invites us and invited people 2,000 years ago, I believe invites us today to follow him into something meaningful, something worthwhile. And when they did that, they had no idea the adventure God had them on. They had no idea what they were saying yes to and what they would experience. But he said, look, if you're willing to leave something desirable, I'm going to give you something meaningful. And I'm going to give you a life of purpose and meaning beyond anything you've experienced up to this point in time. And when they did that, they discovered, I think, the very thing that we're searching for, but we can't seem to find, the very thing that we strive after, but eludes us, happiness. Happiness. And some of you, you're like, okay, that's a nice religious fantasy land you live in, Seth. What, do they only let you out once a week to come and speak on Sunday? Are you holed up in this churchy world and where there are unicorns and rainbows and it's just all happy and whatever? And some of you, I don't necessarily know your specific story, but I've talked to enough people to know, and maybe you found Jesus and you prayed that prayer and you made a decision. Maybe you were even baptized and you found a lot of things. You found religion, but in the process of finding religion, you didn't exactly find happiness. In fact, for a lot of people, church is about the last place you're going to go to find out how to be happy. How many of us equate happiness and God together? Not very many people. You go to Jesus so you can feel guilty about yourself, and you look for stuff so that you can be happy, right? You know what I'm talking about. That our assumption in this world around us is that happiness comes from acquiring external things. You just get your happy what? Whatever your happy what is, and if you can just get your happy what, then you'll finally be happy. Such as pleasure, right? Just find some pleasure. If that's your what, you find some pleasure and you'll be happy. And if you can't find it in a person, you can find it in images and some me time. Just look for that pleasure and you'll be good. Or get new stuff. Get new stuff, acquire the new thing, whatever the new thing is, whether, it's on Amazon and you have that promise of 48-hour shipping. Isn't that exciting? When that package comes, you're like, ooh, it's new, right? Science actually shows us we get a dopamine hit when we buy stuff. So get a new car, get a new relationship, get a new house, get a new whatever. Or experiences. Maybe that's your happy what. In fact, we are so built for experiences right now. It's not enough to take your kids shopping for a Christmas tree. You've got to ride the tractor. You've got to have the hot chocolate. You've got to have the dancing elves picture so that you can have an experience. Pigeon Forge is like the mecca of experience. You know what I'm talking about? Because you've got these not very interesting mountains in the background. Meanwhile, you've got go-karts and you've got wax museums and you've got medieval times. Who wouldn't rather see jousting than the majestic mountains back there? Forget those. We've got experiences. We got to go to the happiest place on the planet, right? We got to have our experiences. Or entertainment. Entertainment, we have got to be entertained through the endless scroll, through the binge watching of things. That's why we give our kids devices. Heaven forbid they be bored, because we know there's no happiness attached to boredom. So we've got to give them something. Or how about finding ourselves? We're told to find ourselves, and culture's holding us down. And so we've got to break the cultural norms. We've got to go for whatever it is that's going to help us find ourselves. And with that, we need affirmation. Because if we can get affirmation about who we now feel that we are, then we'll suddenly be happy. And we get our happy what? But the thing that we need to understand and even acknowledge is that external things don't provide enduring happiness. They may provide it for a moment, but the thing about our happy what is that it just leads to a happy what else? right? I mean, you get the new car and it smells great until your kids start eating food in there, and then it smells like dried Cheerios, just like your old car. And you're thinking, how do I get that new car smell back? I guess I need a new one, right? Or we have another new experience. I mean, it was great going to the apple orchard and getting to do the hayride and all that fun stuff, but now we need another new experience. The technology distracted our kids until the battery died. Now what are we going to do, right? I mean, we've got to figure this out. Or I was being affirmed as I was figuring out who I am, and now I'm not being affirmed anymore. So now who I am maybe I'm not who I thought I should be or was or what. I mean, it's so confusing. Then I just need another happy what? I need another happy identity. And the point is that none of those things last. They're like what we talked about last week. They're just vapor. And we hold on to them or try to hold on to them, but they elude us. But what if the problem for us isn't that we have these desires? What if desire isn't the problem? What if our problem is how we go about searching for happiness? And so today, what I want to talk about is that I believe that there is a path laid out for happiness for us. And listen, this is not something new. I just want to be really clear here. We talked about last week how Jesus came. He was eternally existent. He had never walked on earth necessarily in the form of a human being like he did when he was born 2,000 years ago, but he was eternally existent, always there. So he came to introduce people to the old things that were being made new, the old things that they had discarded and moved on from, and he came to refocus them on what God had done and what he continues to do. And the thing that I think Jesus understood, as we're going to see in just a couple minutes, is he laid out a path toward happiness. And the path toward happiness is introduced to us because the other paths don't lead to happiness. They lead actually to unhappiness. Now, there's so much to this that we can't actually cover it all in 1 week. So we're going to break today's message up into 2 Sundays. So you're just going to get a taste of it today, and then we'll bring it all to a conclusion tomorrow. But in case you can't be here, here's the bottom line for both weeks, and that's that our pursuit of happiness away from God and away from the ways of God is what leads us to unhappiness. Now, about 2,600 years ago, the nation of Israel was in decline. They were, it was not a good thing. They were walking away from God. They were suffering all kinds of things. And in the midst of that, there was a prophet who's a mouthpiece for God, this prophet named Jeremiah, who came and he spoke, and he said something that I think is so profound. Here's what he said, Jeremiah 6, verse 16. He says, "This is what the Lord says." Now, anytime you're reading through particularly the Old Testament, and you see the word Lord in all caps, it refers to Yahweh specifically. It's not just any God, it's Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the God of the Jewish people, the one who's the creator God, God over everything. So he says, this is what that God, Yahweh, says. Stand at the crossroads and look. It's like, look, you are on a crossroads in life. You are looking around. You're trying to figure out where to go. But before you try and blaze a path forward, he says, I want you to pause and look around. He says, ask for the ancient paths. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it. You're trying to figure this world out. You're trying to grab it by its tail, right, and shove it in your pocket. But God already gave us some instruction, they say. He says, you don't need to blaze a new trail. You don't need to figure this out on your own. There is already a clear path for you to take. And he goes on, he says, and when you take it, he says, you will find rest for your souls. Now, I won't ask you to raise your hand here, but how many of us in the room or how many watching online wish we could have rest for our souls? How many of us are weary of living the life that we have been living, always pursuing something, never seeming to get it? How many of us wish we could just get to this place of rest? Man, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But here's the problem, and it wasn't just Israel's problem, it's our problem too. He said, but you said, we will not walk in it. Those ancient paths, that clear pathway that you've shown us, God, we're not interested. We'll figure it out on our own. Sounds like a teenager, doesn't it? How many of you parents of teenagers, you can relate to this. You know what, you try and tell your kids what to do, and they're like, no, we'll figure it out on our own. We don't need your help, mom and dad. You're dumber than dirt, until we turn 19 and realize that you weren't as stupid as we thought you were at the time. But now we're living with the consequences of it. And that's exactly what happened to the nation of Israel. They were like a bunch of dumb teenagers, We'll do our own thing. We'll figure it out. We don't care about these ancient paths. We are going to blaze our own way. And what Jeremiah was saying is that the path God has laid out for you, it is a path that is full of blessing, and it's full of rest, and it is tried and true. So why don't we follow it? There's a theologian named John Henry Newman. He said something regarding this. I love what he said. He said this. He said, if I want to travel north and all the roads are cut to the east, of course I shall complain of the roads. I shall find nothing but obstacles. I shall have to surmount walls and cross rivers and go round about, and after all fail of my end. Think about that. Think about where our world is as you pursue happiness outside of the well-traveled, well-laid out ancient roads. He's like, look, you ignore the signs for exits, you ignore your compass readings, you're trying to trailblaze it on your own, and you don't even get there in the end. And the result is unhappiness. Maybe there's a different way. In fact, the Jewish concept of happiness, here's how they defined it. They defined it using two Hebrew words. Tov is the first word. Say it with me. It's kind of fun. Ready? Tov. Tov. It means pleasant, delightful, good. And then they also kind of, in the idea of happiness also comes shalom, which is blessedness and wholeness, peace, wholeness, goodness. All these are considered blessedness. To be happy, to be blessed means that you have tov and shalom, that life is pleasant and good and delightful, and it's peaceful and it's whole, meaning in spite of the circumstances around you, that you have found this kind of place of peace, and this goodness of God goes with you. It's beautifully pictured in a psalm, Psalm 129. Now, Psalm 129 is called a psalm of ascents, A-S-C-E-N-T, like ascend, I'm ascending. And the reason it's called a psalm of ascent is because the Jewish people would sing this when they would travel to Jerusalem, which is at the highest kind of, you always travel up to Jerusalem because it sits on a hill. And so as they were ascending, they would sing these psalms, these songs as a people, and it reminded them of who they are, whose they are, and the things that they hold to. And so in the Psalm 128, take a look at, hear the words. It says, blessed are all who fear the Lord, or happy are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. Now the word fear is not like I'm terrified of God. That's not what the concept of fear is. Fear here is kind of a foundational trust that God is the creator, and that God orders the world, and that he holds our lives. He holds our breath, our ability to even exist. And so because of that, I recognize who he am. My life is ordered around the idea that God is at the center of it. And so the psalmist says, when I do that, my life is blessed. I'm walking down a pathway of blessing. Now, the thing we need to understand is that God doesn't reward me with happiness and with blessedness. It's tied to the path. Maybe you grew up in a church environment where you were kind of scorned or shunned, or like God's punishing you for all these things. What we're going to see is that God is saying, look, there is a path, and on that path is blessedness. It's not that God's punishing you when you go off the path. It's just that blessedness and happiness, they don't exist on the other path. They're not tied to the other path, which is why we have to consider where we're going. It's the ancient path that Jeremiah spoke of. And so the song continues to explain it. Here's what he says. He says, you will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Now, we think of prosperity as money and wealth and stuff, but actually this is the word we were just talking about. It's the word tov, good things, blessedness. There will be a sense of overflowing joy. You ladies, some of you participated in the IF gathering yesterday, and you learned about Psalm 23. And there's a verse in Psalm 23 where King David says, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life. And that word goodness is also the word tov. You get the idea that this is just a pleasantness about my life. And then he gives some illustrations. Now, these were important to the people of Israel. We don't necessarily relate to them, but I'll try and help us make sense of it. Here's what the psalmist says. He says, your wife will be like a fruitful vine. Guys, I wouldn't tell your wife that. That's a weird thing to say. Might slap you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. And the point of a fruitful vine, you think about a vine that produces all kinds of fruit, and you take the fruit and it just grows more and more fruit. And the point is that you are blessed to be a blessing. Your life overflows. And it's out of that overflowingness that it pours into the lives of other people. And olive trees in Jerusalem and Israel, olive trees do not grow from seed. They grow from shoots that grow up around the olive tree. And so these shoots come up out of the ground. They are identical copies of the original tree. And so something new grows from something old, and those shoots are planted. And the point is that out of us, out of our lives, comes a blessedness and a blessing. We're blessed to be a blessing. It overflows into the lives of other people. Our happiness comes when we share beyond what we have. It's not for ourselves, it's for the good of others. Now, we can relate to that, can't we? Do you know any happy, selfish people? No. But that's this point that when you understand, when you walk in these ways, God's going to continue blessing you, but you know it's not just for you. He continues on, he says this, he says, yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. This will be the goodness. When God is at the center of creation, when you put God at the center of creation, it will necessarily lead you to God being at the center of you, and it will lead you to a place of happiness. And again, the blessings come because the path we're on contain that blessedness. It's not about earning, it's about being on the path where those things exist. The psalmist kind of finishes with this, says, may the Lord bless you from Zion. That's where Yahweh lives. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem, the goodness of Jerusalem all the days of your life. And he goes on, he says, and may you live to see your children's children. Peace, shalom, be on Israel. And for those of us who have kids, we think about one day seeing our children's children and the closeness of a family, the beautifulness of that life being passed on. That's a happy thing, isn't it? When we order our lives around God, and when we order our lives around creation and the ways of God, we recognize that good things take place here. We can all think about people who have ordered their lives differently, can't we? And with them has come trials and struggles, and they call us up and say, I need to borrow some money because I've got this thing going on and I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do about it. And and we look at them and we say, you know what? You have made a decision on a path that doesn't include happiness. And the reason they're so unhappy, what went wrong? You stood at the crossroads. And instead of saying, I'm going to walk down the ancient paths that's set before me, you said, I'm going to blaze my own trail and figure out my own thing and walk in my own way. And it's not that God is punishing them. Is that the happiness doesn't exist on the path that they selected. When you and I go against the grain of the way the universe was created, what happens when you go against the grain? You get splinters. And that's the reality. But when we recognize God's ways, there's an inherent blessedness and happiness to it. And so when Jesus stepped onto the path and stepped into the world all these years later, and he pointed out a way, he said, look, you're not better people. You're not better because of that. You're better off because of that. And he confronted this notion of happiness that our world kind of throws at us and entices us with, this empty happiness that never seems to satisfy. He says, there's a different way. There's an ancient path that you have ignored and forgotten. And so it's not surprising that he would kind of just off the bat begin explaining this to his people, that God put within us the capacity for happiness. And if he created us and we have that capacity, we would necessarily think that he has provided a way for us to find happiness with the path that he has laid out for us. So it's not surprising that early on in his ministry, he said, look, I'm going to help you walk through and understand how to have happiness. This very famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, perhaps you've heard of that. He talks about all these ways, this path we walk on toward Tov and Shalom, toward blessedness and happiness and the good things God has for you. Now, I had the privilege of being there about a month ago to this mountainside where Jesus delivered this, and it's so beautiful. I'll show you some pictures next week. But as you think about Jesus sitting and sharing, you can almost envision a twinkle in his eye saying, look, God has something good for you. He does. I want you to know that. If you're here today and you're trying to figure out, is God good? I just want you to know he has something good for you. And that good comes when we walk down his path because there is an inherent blessedness and happiness attached to it. Now, as I said, we don't have time to get through all these, but we're going to get through a few. Here's how he starts. He says, blessed are or happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Right out of the gate, he's like, look, money doesn't have anything to do with this. Money has nothing to do with this. No thing will make you happy. And spiritually speaking, when you have a spiritual poverty, when you recognize you are nothing without God, you will discover happiness. You know why? Because the opposite is pride. The opposite is I'm full of myself. The opposite is I know everything, and God, you should be impressed with me, and look at my career, and look how the resources I have, and look at my kids, and look at my wife, and look at all these wonderful things, or my husband, aren't I so wonderful? And the opposite is kind of looking at God and saying, I'm so great, I don't even need God. I got this whole thing figured out. But that doesn't lead to happiness, because we know people. In fact, we see them in the media, we see them in Hollywood who have everything seemingly, and yet they don't have happiness. Why is that? I think one of the reasons is because we're unreliable as people. As much as we want to control things and control the world around us, we can't control it. There comes a point in time where, the marriage struggles, the kids make decisions, they've got minds of their own, and I'm not happy anymore, or the career, somebody, I lost my job and now I've lost this. And we can't control the world around us. One of the most fascinating spectacles for me has been the Murdaugh murders from South Carolina. You know what I'm talking about? It just kind of ended about a month ago. But this crazy rich guy, a lawyer from South Carolina, decided that he was going to kill his wife and son because they were finding out that he was embezzling money to buy drugs and keep up this whole charade. And so as a result, he was on trial, and the thing that got him, he had controlled so many things, but the thing that got him was his voice recording on somebody's device that placed him at the place of the crime when the crime happened. He had controlled everything, but there was one thing he couldn't control. And now, my guess is he's not very happy, right? But the point is that when we recognize we are nothing without God, when I'm not trying to control the world around me, I just realize that I'm nothing without God, and today is a gift. And I'm just thankful for everything that he has given me, because I don't deserve any of it. See, poor people don't depend on their stuff because they ain't got no stuff to depend on. Being poor in spirit says I don't depend on who I am because I've got nothing in me that's worth depending on. So I say, God, I'm dependent on you. And what would it look like if you were to embrace that whole concept and say, you know what, God, I am just dependent on you. And remind yourself throughout the day as you go throughout your life, say, every moment, every breath I breathe, I am dependent on the goodness of God in my life. I had a friend who told me once, praying before meals, that's just kind of whatever, God doesn't really care about that. And maybe he doesn't care about that, I don't know, but I see it as a built-in time of my day to just remind myself who I am and whose I am and being thankful for what God has given me. And maybe there's an opportunity to start your day and begin your day and say, you know what? I'm just choosing to be grateful because God, you've given me a new day today, and I don't know what I'm going to encounter, but I trust that you're going to be with me through it. Have you ever met a grateful person who's unhappy? All the unhappy people I've met generally are ungrateful. Grateful people tend to be very happy people. And so Jesus' point is when we recognize we are nothing without God, it leads us to this place of gratitude, and it leads us to tov and shalom that we were talking about. They'll be yours. He goes on, he says, blessed are those who mourn, or happy are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, that's kind of a weird thing to say, right? Because grief and happiness don't seem like they're related. In fact, we like to avoid grief at all costs in our culture. We like to ship grief away and not think about it and not believe that it even exists. We don't like to talk about people who have died with people who, were related to them because, it might upset them. Why does mourning bother us so much? Ever thought about that? I think mourning reminds us of our brokenness. It reminds us that we're not okay, and it reminds us that the world around us isn't okay, and that there are problems in the world around us. And so it connects our hearts to this uncomfortable reality that our world, it's just broken. Last week, we looked at the words of the author of Ecclesiastes where he said, all these things are vapor. But then he got to this whole idea of mourning, and he said, this isn't vapor. Here's what he said about it. He said, it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart. Yes, parties are more fun, but funerals are more real. Because it reminds us From dust we came, to dust we return. Death truly is our destiny. And those who mourn, they see the brokenness on a macro level, on a world level. They see the brokenness in families. They see the brokenness in the way children are treated at times, in abusive situations. They see the brokenness of politics and power and how people leverage things for themselves all the time. But they also see brokenness on a micro level. We talked about this at Easter. We see brokenness inside us. I say, God, again, I am nothing without you. I need God. Jesus says, when we do that, we'll be comforted. God brings us his presence and his comfort. We'll have tov and shalom. Next, he says this. He says, blessed or happy are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth. The meek people are the ones who see themselves in the proper context of all creation. They know they're not God. They're not trying to be God. They also know that there are other valuable people in the world, and so they're not trying to leverage everything for their own sake. Self-assertiveness, believe it or not, is not a Christian value. Thinking about me as the center of the universe doesn't actually lead me to be happy. Looking out for me just assumes that I'm the most important thing. But let me ask you this question. Do you know any happy, self-centered people? No. Happiness and self-centeredness do not coexist. They can't. Self-centered and selfish people are unhappy because they are always thinking about themselves. But meek people embrace the reality that there are, God's God and there are other important people around me, and I'm going to leverage what I have for the good of other people. A beautiful picture of meekness is Jesus dying on the cross, where the whole world was at his fingertips, and yet he gave his life for you and for me for brokenness of other people. And so meek people are forgiving. They're not self-serving. They're not self-centered. They're trying to figure out, how can I use my life for the good of someone else? How can I put others first? And Jesus says, walk down that path. There's tov and shalom for you. There's happiness there. There's a blessedness. And then the last one we're going to look at today, he says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Not hunger and thirst for, food and drink, but the way you hunger and thirst for food and drink, Jesus says, I wish you would hunger and thirst for righteousness. The things of God that are right, the right ways of God, the right paths of God, being made right with God. I wish that you would live in such a way that you would desire the things of God in your life. And do you know why this is important? Do you know why this leaves us filled? The reason is because it's regret and guilt that keep us from being happy, isn't it? But when you hunger and thirst for what's right, there's happiness there. In fact, you know this. Our greatest regrets come from knowing the right thing but choosing the wrong thing. We carry scars. We carry memories. We carry consequences. In fact, past decisions, we thought it was just a Friday night or just a spring break or just one drag or just one, date or relationship, right? And yet here we are 10, 20, 30 years later, bearing the consequences of what we thought was just a momentary decision that wasn't that big of a deal. But it wasn't on the ancient path that God had laid out for us. It was on a different path. We were blazing away. We were blazing our own trail, and we wouldn't listen to what anybody else had to say. And it's our past decisions that rob us of present happiness. It's no wonder a new car isn't going to fix that. I mean, it helps us forget about our problems for a moment, but they still exist, and we're bringing this garbage, this baggage with us everywhere we go. So Jesus says, man, I wish you would just hunger and thirst for God's ways. Because when you do so, the result is going to be lasting happiness. It's going to be peace. It's going to be freedom. And as with all these, as I said earlier, we know people, don't we? We know people who have blazed their own trails in life, and they are so unhappy. And they call us, and they want our help, and they want us to figure it out for them. But man, I just wish we all hungered and thirsted for the things of God, because if we did, we would discover the thing that we are so searching for in our society and culture, but that just eludes us. We would find tov and shalom. And the truth is, we make decisions at some point, say we want to walk in this way, but over time, just like the people of Israel, we get distracted, we walk a different way. The Apostle Paul said, let us not become weary of doing good. Let's not become weary of doing good. See, Jesus was painting a pathway On the internet, you can find 10 simple ways to do whatever. That's not what Jesus was getting at. It's not like, do this immediately. No, I'm happy, you know. It was a pathway. It's moving us in the direction of happiness. This is a way of being. It's not like a once and done decision. This is a lifetime. That's why we say adventure of a lifetime. This is a movement in a certain direction that becomes part of who we are. And it's at the end of that we discover, wow, this is happy. I'm blessed. I'm so thankful for all that God has given me. People have asked me a lot about my trip to Israel, and if you don't know, I've received a sabbatical grant from the Lilly Foundation. I went to Israel about a month ago, and then I'll be gone in June and July this summer. But through that, I had the opportunity to go to Israel, which is really cool. Our first day there, our guide asked us this question, you know, what are your expectations? And honestly, I didn't really come with a lot of expectations. My kids had an expectation for me, and their expectation was that I would float on the Dead Sea, and they wanted a picture of it. So I give you a picture of me floating on the Dead Sea. My only other thing was I really wanted to go to En Gedi, which is where Saul needed to relieve himself in the desert. He found a cave. It turned out that his adversary David was hiding in the cave. We've talked about this before. So with that, there's this beautiful oasis with a waterfall in the midst of a desert. It's just so cool, so pretty. So that's what I was looking for. But then we got to go to other sites. We got to go to Nazareth, where Angel Gabriel delivered the news to Mary that she was pregnant. She's going to give birth to God's son. We went to Bethlehem, to this cave where Jesus was born, supposedly. We went to this spot, this church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built on top of Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. And you can put your hands in these places and have these moments, I guess. And those were all nice. But the most impactful thing to me was probably something that I noticed in my hotel room door. Outside of the door, there was a little box. It looked a little different than this, but I got my own box. It was put up at an angle. And I asked our guide what that was, because I saw it at the next hotel. I'm like, that's weird. You know, what are these things? This is called a mezuzah. And within the mezuzah is typically a scroll with something called the Shema inside the scroll. And the Jewish people, when they enter and when they leave their homes, they touch the mezuzah, not as just a ritual, but meant to remind themselves about who they are and whose they are. That they want it to be a part of their everyday life. It contains the words, as I said, of the Shema, which is written by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." In other words, love the Lord with your life. And not just love the Lord's ways with your life. And it was a daily reminder. I mean, they have these reminders so built into their culture and society of who they are and whose they are. And so, essentially, Israel, find yourselves asking, where are the ancient, well-worn paths? Because it's on those paths that you will find the thing that you're looking for, the Tov and Shalom. And so we're going to pick up there next week, but before we do, I want to ask you an important question. And the question is, are you happy? Really? With the person you're married to, if you're married, or dating, or your kids, or your grandkids, would they say you're happy? Really? Is your life full? Or are you just going after one thing after another, always searching for happiness and never finding it? Or in the words that we've talked about today, do you have Tov and Shalom in your life? Do you have peace? Do you have goodness, the goodness of God, the delightfulness, the enjoyment that he wants you to experience? Is there a wholeness to your life and a general just peace to your existence? And if not, maybe you're missing something. In fact, maybe there's an invitation for you that Jesus was giving for a different adventure on your lifetime, a different path, a different way forward. It's an ancient path, a well-worn path, and on it come blessings beyond anything you can imagine. So we're going to pick it up there next week, and I hope you'll be back with us. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, we are in a world that sells happiness, and nobody has it. And so as we just wrestle with these things today and the days ahead, Father, would you point us in the direction of the ancient paths? Would you help us to see and understand? Would you help us to be honest with ourselves and the places where we look, the places where we go to try and find happiness. Father, for the person who's just not happy in the room today or watching online, I pray that you would lead them in a different path. Help us not to be like the people of Israel who said, no, we don't want anything to do with those paths. We'll go our own way. Father, we see where that leads. So give us the courage to try something new. Father, thank you for everyone in this room today. Would you give us tov and shalom as we walk down the path that you have laid out for us? Thank you for this time, Father. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.